This is a Bible study. So this is Joseph Rises. This is Genesis chapter 41. Today's study is based on the Koran Tanakh and the JPS translation. So let's begin. First, from my last Bible study, I asked the question, what exactly got the cook and the cupbearer put into the dungeon? The answer is not that amazing, actually. According to a midrash, which again, unless you're reading Jewish midrash, you're not going to find out that there is an answer to this. But according to a midrash, the cupbearer was accused of dropping a fly in Pharaoh's wine cup. Whether or not there was wine in the cup, I don't know. And the baker was accused of putting a pebble into Pharaoh's bread. Not exactly the palace intrigue I was speculating on in my last Bible study. This chapter takes place 2 years after the previous chapter. It's one of the few times that the Bibles divide up the narrative. Is also the same way that the Hebrews divide up the narrative. So that's a plus. Pharaoh had 2 dreams. Really, they were nightmares. Interestingly, the Tanakh translates the land Egypt is Mazraim. Now, I'm not sure if Mazraim is the Hebrew name for Egypt or if this is a designation for the region that Joseph is in. So I don't know if there's a difference there, but anyway. The magicians of the land could not interpret Pharaoh's dreams. Then, in his distress, for some reason, he was talking to the chief butler, as it is in the translation I was reading, but in the other translations he has been labeled the cupbearer. So he talks to the cupbearer, and the cupbearer then remembers that Joseph had a gift of dream interpretation. He explains how the Hebrew servant had helped ease the minds of he and his companion, the baker, and how Joseph accurately interpreted their dreams as to the reality of what actually did happen. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, although again not looking for prophecy, just looking for a way to settle his mind. So Yosef in Hebrew, that's Joseph, shaves and changes his clothing, and he receives a request from Pharaoh to use his gift for him. But Joseph's immediate answer, is that it's not me but God. And Pharaoh, not missing a beat, then tells Joseph the 2 dreams. Joseph then explains the meaning of the dreams to Pharaoh, giving all credit to God, saying that God is warning Pharaoh that 7 years of surplus will be followed by 7 years of grievous famine. Joseph then proceeds without warning to advise the Pharaoh on how to best prepare and store food for a long famine. So on that note, it's kind of interesting that the Pharaoh doesn't miss a beat. The Pharaoh doesn't go like, oh, you're not going to interpret, off with your head. He doesn't do any of that. He doesn't threaten punishment. He just simply goes with what's being said to him. That's interesting. I don't know how accurate that is to how ancient pharaohs would have acted in dealing with their advisors and their wise men and their magicians and their dream interpreters, but I guess so. And I also like the fact that Joseph just goes straight ahead. As soon as he gets told to do it, he does it. Also, there's a big question here on whether or not Pharaoh is the right name for the king at this time period. Like I said, the earliest date that I can find where the story could be taking place is around 2300. So I don't know if they were using the term Pharaoh at that time in Egypt. Also, there is a question on how long grain and corn can be stored. The best numbers I could find is 5 years. So you can store corn up to 5 years in very well climate controlled, very cooled storage facilities. So it might sound like this is a little bit far-fetched, but that being said, I have heard stories of archaeologists digging up grain stores, ancient grain stores, and being able to bake bread with the ancient grain, being able to make wine, that even ancient wine that is stored, being able to be drunk, at least not being poisonous according to the molecular structure. How rare that is, I don't know. But I do know that it is possible to preserve food past 100 years, past 1,000 years. If it's possible to store a whole granary, I don't know. It is possible to store some foods up to 23 years, but most foods, even with extreme storage, don't last, are not viable after 5 years. As for the probability of ancient Egypt having the technology to have food last for a whole 7 years, doesn't sound very plausible, but in the story itself, it doesn't sound like their food actually lasts 7 years. By doing that, they extend the life of the little bit of food that they're bringing in during the time of the famine. Joseph then proceeds without warning to advise the Pharaoh on how to best prepare and store the food for the long famine. Joseph's words and ideas so impressed Pharaoh and his servants that Pharaoh gave him the position of Viceroy, or Vizier in some translations, that he had advised Pharaoh to create in order to get the task he recommended done. Now this is interesting. The Pharaoh then took Joseph into his entourage and renamed him, gave him a wife named Asnath, the daughter of a priest, and Joseph's plan was implemented. Joseph was 30 now at this point in the story, and Joseph did as he had said to Pharaoh. And in that time as viceroy, he had 2 children, 2 sons, Manshishi and Ephraim. Manashi is, I think, how the English usually translates it. The famine then hit, devastating Egypt, though to modern readers, Joseph, having helped Egypt survive the famine and having 2 children and being accepted by the Egyptians and being able to thrive and having his name cleared and getting married and have children sounds like a high point in the story, like a happy high point in the story. To the original Hebrew audience, these confluences of events would have signaled a possible catastrophe. They expected foreigners to treat them badly and mistrust them. Here, by Joseph being embraced by Egypt, Joseph has left the promised land. He has taken an Egyptian name, gifted and taken it. He has married a non-Israeli wife and has had 2 sons by her, including his firstborn son, which, even though Genesis is a very long narrative of the second-born or later-born son getting to be the dominant son, in tradition, the firstborn is very important. So this chapter, the way that it ends, is no small matter for the original audience that would have been hearing this story. They were extremely concerned with preserving cultural identity. To the Jews of that time, this ending was like a scary point. It was a tension point. It was a way to keep them listening.